Hello and welcome to Revision Tips for SIPS Level 5, Advanced Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 8, Project and Change Management, and it's Learning Outcome 2, which is to understand the concept of organisational change and how it can be achieved. So we'll look at the different types of change, we'll look at the situations that lead to change and the evaluation of an organisation's response to change, as well as the way we can manage and achieve and maintain it. So this is the first type of change. So the first one is known as evolution. 4 categories of change that were identified are evolution, adaption, revolution, and reconstruction. But evolution is an incremental type of change in nature, but it's transformational in the sense that you cannot reverse it. So evolution is a change in strategy that requires environmental change, but over time, it can also be explained in terms of looking at what the organisation is learning and continually adjusting their strategies with the changing environment. This is defined as a learning organisation. Evolutionary change has a number of advantages and disadvantages, but change identified as evolution can transform the way an organisation operates. But the longer term time frame may make change less disruptive, as it's something that's planned and phased. So Grundy used a model of major change typologies and would define evolution as smooth incremental. So change that develops in a predictable way, like getting older. You don't just wake up one day and you're 10 years older. It's very slow and systematic, smooth incremental evolution. So the advantages here is it's highly likely that if change is implemented, it will become part of the culture. More people will need to be involved in the design, more people identified with the stage and that change. And it's likely that the change fits the organisation, understanding the current situation. More input about the problem is needed, leading to more thoughtful solutions. The downside, of course, though, is it's very risky up front. High likelihood that people won't really understand or buy into the change because it's hard to build momentum. And it can be a little bit haphazard. Changes can be introduced that do not move the organisation towards where it needs to go. And that's compounded if there's not an organisation true north or a target condition. And it can be designed by committee where a sense of central direction is lost, especially true if there's not one clear owner or a change agent. So the second type is adaptation or adaption. Change here is incremental, but a series of step changes are required to realign how the organisation operates. Adaption is change which can be accommodated within the current environment. It occurs incrementally. It's the most common form of change in organisations. The 2 types of challenges in change is adaptive and technical. The technical is defined as those that can be solved by the knowledge of experts, whereas adaptive requires new learning. When the problem definition, solution and implementation is clear, this calls for a technical change. For the adaptive change, that must come from a collective intelligence of the employees at all levels. So together they learn their way towards the solution. There are 6 principles for leading adaptive change. Get on the balcony. Leaders need to have distance to see a bigger picture. Identify the adaptive change. Leaders need the ability to identify the adaptive change when it's called for and address it in order to turn it round. Regulate distress. Do not overwhelm, but provide enough tension to maintain urgency. Maintain disciplined attention. They must be able to identify distraction and refocus the work. Give work back to the people. Get others to assume responsibility and then instill confidence in others through encouragement and support. And lastly, protect the voice of leadership from below, rather than stop those at risk of speaking up. There needs to be voices heard at all levels. A revolution, the extent of change here is transformational, with a number of stimulating changes taking place in a significant situation. It's requiring a fundamental realignment of an organisation's strategy and culture. In revolutionary change, one person orchestrates change from the top. The change is often about cutting costs or regaining control over an organisation that's lost its way by taking inappropriate risks or perhaps by developing myopic inability to look externally and becoming inwardly driven. And revolutionary change tends to continue to be driven by one individual surrounded by a small group of trusted managers. The change process itself becomes reliant on the individual. Revolutionary change has a number of advantages as well as disadvantages. And some of the advantages is the low risk of change failing to take effect. Change will occur quickly and will have the resource needed, and it will be enforced by senior managers. But the downside is that change may not become part of the culture before focus shifts. The change may roll back a few months after leadership changes focus. And then you've got this opportunity cost, where other improvements may be needed, but everyone is tied up working on the mandated improvement. And it's not necessarily a good fit. So the last of the four is reconstruction. And this is a series of rapid and simultaneous changes, fundamentally altering the way the organisation operates in response to a catastrophic event or situation. Reconstruction is concerned with rapid and immediate change, an upheaval in an organisation. This can be compared to sports, where a decision has been made to change the way in which the team is playing. They've come up with a new strategy for all the players quickly and effectively. So, for example, in business, an organisation may take structural changes such as a major cost-cutting exercise to deal with difficult or challenging market conditions. There are three types of change: closed, contained, and open. And these three types of change happen in all organisations, each of which exists in the past, the present, and the future. When we think about management attempts to exert control, the relationship with the timing of change can be expressed as trying to control the effect of the change we have that's already happened, trying to control the effect of the change that are happening now, and trying to control the expected future changes. In all three, the change can be closed, contained, or open. Now, closed changes operate over a short period of time. Business parameters and the variables affecting are known. Cause and effect are known, and experience is a reliable guide to action. So closed change timescales are getting shorter. An example of a closed change would be knowing that your car is empty of fuel, going to the petrol station, filling it up. The change has happened. Didn't really need much information or time to think about it because you've done it before. It's very predictable. A contained change operates over longer timescales, and business parameters and the variables affecting these are problematic. Cause and effect are only subject to assessments of probability and prediction. Experience is no longer totally reliable guide to action, but can be used to assess probability of causes and predict the most likely outcome. So contained changes timescales are getting shorter. So an example of a contained change would be a farmer who has previously cut all of the wheat down in his field, but this year decides to employ an agency worker to do it for him. They won't necessarily know the skill or the time it will take an agency staff to do it. They know how long it took them to do it, but will they know how long it was going to take somebody else to do it? So you're probably building a little bit of flexibility with the timescales just for those minor unknowns, but it is a contained change. Now, open changes operate over longer timescales, and business parameters and the variables affecting are very volatile, and probability and prediction break down. Experience no longer has any value in predicting possible outcomes. Possible scenarios become too many or too varied to be handled. It may even be impossible to distinguish between variables that are important and those that are not. And usually open-ended changes is because it's happening for the very first time. So you could use Brexit as an example of an open-ended change, or the current coronavirus pandemic. No one really knows when it's going to end or how it's going to end because it's happening for the very first time. Another example might be a surgeon deciding to operate on a patient doing a new procedure for the very first time. There may be some unknowns around how long it will take for the patient to recover, whether they need to have more surgery, how many people they'll need in the theatre, how long the surgery will take, and so on. Until you're running that procedure over and over again, it becomes an open-ended change. But keeping in line with the field of change, some people resist change. And the diagram on the screen, this force field analysis, comes from Kurt Lewin. He developed force field analysis as a technique to identify the forces that are at play within an organisation's situation. So it helps to identify the power and forces involved, to identify ways in which change can be influenced within the organisation. The different lengths of the arrows represent the strength of the forces. So understanding what forces are present in the change process will help the procurement professional to determine the following: whether the forces for change can be strengthened, whether the forces against change can be addressed so their impact is weakened, whether a planned long-term change is possible, which change projects are worth pursuing and which are likely to fail. Clarity regarding these forces can enable procurement to address issues to prevent change from being an evolutionary force. If change is going to happen, the driving forces need to be stronger than the restraining forces. A challenge for organisational change is to understand what phase of the organisational life cycle the organisation is in. In the startup phase, where the entrepreneurial thinking about the business, a team is formed and the business plan gets written. In the growth phase, revenue climb, new services and products are developed, more employees hired, and projects are developed to promote growth. But in the mature phase, the focus is on sustaining momentum, renewal, especially to avoid entrenched bureaucracy. The focus is also on creativity and innovation, sometimes to start new ventures through projects that have new life cycles themselves. But inevitably, the life of an organisation will start to shrink, and this is the decline stage. This shrinkage could be due to market becoming saturated or because the consumers are switching to different products. Whilst this decline may be inevitable, it may be possible for companies to make some profit by creating projects to reduce costs or to create alternatives. Decline doesn't have to continue, but external experts have focused on the importance of organisational development and leadership as a way of preventing decline and creating a revival. Now, SWOT analysis is a simple strategic analytical tool that helps an organisation identify, organise and prioritise its activities in response to change. Strengths and weaknesses are factors that are internal to an organisation, over which the business leaders and managers have some control. So examples would be employees, intellectual property, or geographical location. Opportunities and threats are external to the organisation and relate to forces in the wider marketplace. And although the organisation can take action to protect itself from threats and seek to take advantage of identified opportunities, it cannot control these factors. So the examples would include actions of competitors, price of inputs going up, reaction to clients and customers of your products and services. So for a robust SWOT analysis, a broad range of individuals must be included, as well as key members of staff and leadership team. Key strategic partners include your supply chain partners, can also provide a further insight and get you a different aspect from the wider environment. Now, we know the external environment is made up of a number of factors, such as political, economic, sociocultural, and technical. These all come from your steeple factors or pestle factors. And these factors can drive change within an organisation in a short term and over a long term. But your internal drivers for change, often as a result of a change of outcome that affects your strategy. So internal drivers could be things like New leadership, so a new leader comes in and they've got their own management style, or they may be brought in to take some action of some description. There could be a culture of bullying or working conditions that can't be sustained, or you might want to change your strategy, mission, vision, or even your CSR policy. There could be a change to the availability or cost of a resource, or loss of capabilities like a trained machine operative that leaves the business or gets ill. And then you've got future trends and innovation. They also require change. And there are many factors that contribute to modern transformation in a way innovation happens. There's new tools, new resources available to the innovators, new business models that help turn good ideas into viable products, and industry recognition that not all products have to be based on proprietary research. The result is a climate of more open innovation and is accelerating the development of new ideas and turning innovation into a global activity. More people from walks of life and religions of the world are becoming creators. Now, change is rarely caused by a single factor. It's usually caused by a number of different developments and alterations in the internal and the external environment. So, a multiple cause diagram can be used to visually map the relationship between the variety of causes of a certain situation and the relationship between the variables. Over a period of time, the purpose is to be able to show causality behind the situation and the links between the components. This enables procurement to trace various causes of challenge or opportunities that require a response. And questions that have multiple cause diagram will think about things like, why has this happened? What variables contributed to the cause? Why is the organisation response now incorrect? Why is a problem recurring? What variables should the organisation consider in similar circumstances in the future? And what solutions should be identified? Several components need to be included within a multiple cause diagram, and then you label the change that needs to be addressed. Begin with the end change situation and work backwards, and start with immediate cause and consider more distant variables that may have contributed directly or indirectly to that change situation. And as the diagram develops, you make the importance of the variables very clear, inserting additional intermediate variables as they're identified. Arrows, which can be labelled to explain causal connections, provide the direction of causality. And the arrows can be used to indicate that a variable leads to, enables, or contributes to another variable. The diagram does not have to be sequential and instead may contain many loops. Structural changes are those changes made to an organisation's structure that might stem from internal or external factors and are typically affecting how a company is run. We're now going to look at cycle of competitive behaviour and reactive breakpoints, and there are a number of methods that can be used for anticipating when change is imminent and for deciding an appropriate approach to use for its management and implementation. Strebel suggested a model of industry behaviour based on organisations' competitive environment. He uses the concept of evolutionary cycle of competitive behaviour to introduce the idea of breakpoints. That is, in those times where organisations must change their strategies to respond to change in competitive behaviour. And then we have environmental turbulence, which relates to the complexity surrounding an organisation that happens in a short space of time. This comes from Anzoff and McDonnell. They proposed 5 levels of environmental turbulence, ranging from predictable to unpredictable. So examples of environmental turbulence are natural disasters like hurricanes, earthquakes, or floods, or world events like the Brexit vote, new president of the USA being elected, 9/11 terrorist attack, coronavirus pandemic, internal crisis like workers going on strike, or technological problems. So obviously level 1, you could probably link this to your closed change, contained change, open-ended change. Obviously level 1 and 2 is fairly closed, I guess, in the sense that it's predictable. repetitive, easy to manage, or certainly forecastable by extrapolation. 3 and 4 may be more contained changes, but yeah, they're partly predictable by opportunities and threats. Level 3 is slightly harder than level 2, but level 4 becomes harder when it includes global issues. So things like currency exchange rates and things like that might be at level 4. Level 5, this is definitely coronavirus, Brexit. These are sort of unpredictable surprises, the highest level of turbulence. They happen quicker than we can plan for. Yeah, and it's happening for the very first time. Now, reasons why individuals resist change could be because of a lack of understanding or the reason behind the change. They fear the outcome, or they lack the competence. They feel like they haven't been consulted, or they don't trust the outcome. There's a reluctance to change their routine, or they can't see any obvious benefits for them. There's been a general lack of communication, or they've formed an attachment to a current method. And sometimes, if change is constant in an organisation, you get this change fatigue where people think, oh gosh, here we go again. But signs of change can be covert or overt. Obviously, overt is being open, covert is not, it's being sort of hiding it. It can be passive or active. So, passive is sort of letting it go over your head. Active is deliberately working to sabotage. And resistance to change is regarded as negative, and those who resist change are frequently thought of as disobedient, trouble causers. But it is important that you distinguish between a cynic and a skeptic. A cynic sees the worst in every situation, but that's never linked to any facts or evidence. They're just difficult people that before you've even finished explaining what you want to do, they'll say something like, that won't work, but there's no evidence to back that up. A skeptic, on the other hand, just needs to be convinced. So if you show them the reasons how, why, when, etc., you can convince a skeptic. Now, change agents are used for implementing and maintaining change by facilitating change through the development of individuals and management competencies. But change agents are often identified at the beginning of a change process. Now, having an internal change agency ensures that the structural expertise in managing both incremental and transformational change are within the organisational context. And there are 4 different types of change agents, from transformers. These are for large-scale transformational changes. Enforcers, who are usually embedded within an organisation, like strategic projects for consistency. Specialists, who focus on incremental change within a particular function or department. And then independents, where there's a optional change agency delivering localised, specific and small change projects within a particular business unit. But there's sort of arguments whether or not you should use somebody internally as the change agent or to employ somebody externally to do that work instead. So if you use an internal change agent, the good thing is that they know the organisational culture, they've got the relationships, they're going to be cheaper. But the downside is they will avoid making unpopular decisions because they've got to stay around and, live, breathe and eat it. They might actually be a little bit more passionate about their existing role. So they'll say, oh, leave that alone, keep that as it is. They're not necessarily experienced in managing change. They'll get behind on their day job and it will probably take longer. So the arguments for and against an external one is they won't be afraid of unpopular decisions. They're objective and impartial. They've done it before. They're trained in change. So they should be able to come in and move fast, get paid quickly, move off, being completely focused on the change and get the job done. But the downside is they are expensive, they won't know your culture and may not have those professional relationships with people in the organisation. In terms of maintaining change, there's this sort of spiral of change which starts with kind of pre-contemplation. You know you need to do it, but you're not going to do anything about it. Then you start to become a little bit more aware of the problem. Contemplation kicks in, but there's no commitment to take any action. The preparation stage is where you actually take some action to address the problem. Then you take the action and modify your behaviour, but it's important that you maintain it, replacing the new with the old. But occasionally things will relapse, and the reason for that is because they haven't been told well done, or well, thanks for your hard work. So people think, well, why have I bothered? So it's really important that you maintain that behaviour with positive reinforcement. The change cycle. Organisational change can have a significant impact on employees, their personal identity, their role, social standing, all sorts of things. So it can cause tension within a team and cause pressure. And there's a 6-stage sequential change model that's characterizing the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that an individual experience in response to change. So the first is loss, which is intrinsic. The human reaction is to resist change. It's inevitable. Then you'll move into the doubt phase, where you've got a defense mechanism that results in heightened levels of emotion. You don't necessarily trust people, and there's a bit of conflict that happens here. Moving into the discomfort stage, you've got a period of anxiety and confusion where you might feel a little bit overwhelmed while you're trying to make sense of the new situation. It can be a result of low levels of performance and high absenteeism. Discovery happens in the implementation phase. This is where individuals try to perform actions to resolve the problem. So at this point, you're a little bit more energetic and thinking, I'm not going to mope around, I'm going to get on with it. You'll then reach stage 5 of understanding, where you begin to gain an insight in the benefits of the change. And an integration happens when you're fully able to accept that change and you feel quite satisfied and content. In order to help support an individual through the change cycle, change management strategies can be adopted that help to minimize the identity issues and emotional sensors. In terms of methods to achieve change, there are three ways, starting with the most positive to the least positive. So we'll start with collaborate. Collaborate is when 2 or more parties work together to try to achieve a common goal. So, you empower people, you all work together, blah, blah, blah. People feel like they're part of that process. So change tends to happen a lot better, but much slower with collaboration. You then have communication, which is the second one. It's essential sometimes that you just keep people informed to minimize resistance, deliver the message, tell them why the change is happening, be honest with them, try and consider the emotions, explain the benefits, why it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how it's going to affect them. So people, don't feel like they're not aware of the reasons. But the last and least popular one is the coercion approach, not a positive way to achieve change, because you're forcing people to conform through fear. So on the face of it, they might appear to accept the change, but they could be angry or upset and start looking for another job. So it's very much a last resort, and you should only use this if collaboration and communication isn't an option or has been tried and failed. It's helpful to clarify to the organisation, when they're trying to achieve a particular goal, or why a particular course of action is or is not needed in order to get there. So this is a goals grid, which is a tool for setting and clarifying goals and objectives. The grid seeks to capture the multidimensional nature of actions and decisions using this 2x2 grid structure. So the first is achieve. You're examining when the organisation wants to gain from the change programme that's currently missing. The most common form of goal may be structured as a successful ERP system. You've then got preserve, which is where you're exploring what the organisation has and what it wants to maintain as part of its future self. So, for example, by implementing an ERP system, you could maintain the existing levels of customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction. Then you've got avoid, which is regarding unintended consequences as a result of the change. So it's important to clarify what is the organisation currently doing that doesn't have and doesn't want to have at the end of the process. For example, an organisation may not want to lose interaction between supply partners. And finally, eliminate regarding things that the organisation would like to tackle and deliberately diverse during that change progress or divest. So the elimination of errors, duplication, waste, and so on. These are methods that you can use to implement change. Again, none of these are things that you should be unfamiliar with at level 5, but just to remind you, you've got Kanban 2-bin system on the top left. Obviously, it aims to improve work systems, maintain inventory. Top middle, you've got Kaizen. Kaizen is Japanese for change for better, and it's based on continuous improvement, small changes that deliver results. Top right, you've got 5S, which again is linked to Kaizen. This is about refining your methods and making progress to eliminate any waste of time and effort. And JIT, just in time at the bottom, a system that makes sure inventory arrives as you need it, so you're not holding unnecessary inventory. Now, empowerment and ownership can make the change easy to accept, giving an individual ownership of a task that goes towards reaching an end goal. But that can only happen when the individual is ready to accept ownership. But the advantages would include increased morale, more productivity, better commitment, quicker problem solving, and less pressure on the management. But if an individual is not ready for the role, the disadvantages include increased risk to the organisation, slower decision making, and possibly a relationship breakdown. Now, incremental adjustment is when the organisation makes small changes with a view of reaching a certain end state. It's often correcting a faulty process by moving people within teams or updating their objective. But incremental change is linked to Kaizen. This is the slow improvements over time. It's a little bit evolutionary, and these can be incremental, smooth, where things are evolving slowly and systematically, or a little bit bumpy, where things remain consistent for a while, but there's a small burst of change to trigger a response. Now, Tashio Ono defined the 7 wastes that describe all activities that add cost but no value. And that's on the left-hand side here, most commonly known as Tim Wood. So you've got transport, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, and defects. So a process adds value by producing goods, providing services that a customer will pay for, but a process will consume resources, and that's where waste occurs. When more resources are consumed than is necessary. And then value stream mapping is known as material and information flow mapping. It's a lean management method for analysing the current state and designing a future state for a series of events that make a product or service from the beginning of the specific process until it reaches the customer. And the last slide of this session is the change spectrum, moving from hard, difficult to soft and messy. So in recent years, many change management gurus have focused on soft issues such as culture, leadership, and motivation. Such elements are important for success, but managing these aspects alone isn't sufficient to implement transformational projects. Soft factors don't directly influence the outcomes for many change programs. For instance, visionary leadership is often vital for transformational projects, but not always. The same can be said for communication with employees. It isn't easy to change attitudes or relationships. They're deeply ingrained in organisation and people. And although changes, say, culture or motivational levels can be indirectly gauged through surveys and interviews, it's tough to get reliable data on the soft factors. What's missing, we believe, is a focus on not so fashionable aspects of change management, the hard factors. These factors bear 3 distinctive characteristics. First, companies are able to measure them in direct or indirect ways. Second, companies can easily communicate their importance, both within and outside the organisation. And third, and perhaps most importantly, businesses are capable of influencing those elements quickly. Some of the hard factors that affect the transformation initiative are time necessary to complete it, the number of people required to execute it, and the financial result that's intended to achieve the outcome. And what this shows is that change projects fail to get off the ground when companies neglect the hard factors. That doesn't mean that executives can ignore the soft elements. That would be a grave mistake. However, if companies don't pay attention to the hard issues first, transformation programs will break down where the soft elements come into play. And that's the end of Learning Outcome 2. Thank you for watching today.